The first thing one must understand when they're looking at my work is that it's not simply an exhibit. I think of my work as a project that deals with the migration patterns of black people, what happens to their traditional culture when they leave the rural area and come to the urban areas, how those traditions change, how new ones come about, what happens to the quality of life for people. And so I am hoping that through my work, I can help people better look at themselves and gain a better understanding of their traditional folk life practices. One of my biggest concerns now is the use of photo documentation for historical preservation in the study of culture. The use of the camera as an adjunct to the study in culture can be invaluable when it comes to preserving what is still available for future generations. The fact that a photograph is still worth 1,000 words. When we start explaining to our young today and our grandchildren tomorrow about the times in which we are living and that our parents have lived in, they may have many questions. If you have a photograph that is constructed well, that gives you enough information about that period, then your chances of explaining to that generation are a lot greater. Right now in America, it's very popular for a lot of folk scholars and people in anthropology and people in art to try to make a comparison between what is happening in traditional black art and folk culture and what is happening in Mother Africa. It's a given that when black people were uprooted from Mother Africa and brought to this country, with them they brought traditions in basket making, blacksmithing, wood carving, and even quilting as far as that goes, that had been handed down in Mother Africa for centuries. One of the things that happened with black people when they came to America, of course, they had to adapt whatever skills they had to materials that were available here, you see. So where a man may make baskets in Nigeria out of some sort of weed or reed, in Mississippi, people make a lot of baskets out of pine needles because there are a lot of pine trees. A lot of people make baskets out of white oak. It's all depending on how one is going to use the basket. As we race rapidly into the 21st century, many of the traditional crafts, the traditional folk life practices are vanishing. One of the reasons they are vanishing is people no longer are practicing them. But if you look very hard and go through the backwoods, you can find people who are still practitioners of traditional crafts. Quilters, there are many people still around quilting, but they're generally people over 50. It's a lot simpler for a young woman today to go buy a blanket from the store than to take the time that it takes to sit down and piece up the top of a quilt and then roll it up on a quilting frame and then stick the needle through all 3 levels and quilt it. And so you find some of the senior citizens or the older black people who still have a tremendous love for this tradition. You find them doing it, but you don't find a lot of young people doing it. There are some people who are young who are interested, but for the most part, it's the older people who still do this. When that generation of quilters pass on, there just won't be any more. I'm quite fond of old people, and I listen a lot to what they have to say because they've spent all of these years storing up wisdom and knowledge, and many young people really don't go to them enough and draw on this tremendous reservoir of wisdom and knowledge. And so I've learned a lot by sitting and listening, and it's helped me tremendously in my work. In Roxham, Mississippi, lives a lady by the name of Miss Annie Mason, who is in her 80s. One day, Miss Annie Mason and I were sitting in her bedroom, and she went into a drawer and pulled out a very old Bible. Traditionally, most people, black and white in America, before people could get birth certificates, would record when someone was born and when someone died in the family Bible. And so she brought out this old book and began to show me how the history of the family had been recorded in the Bible. She told me this neat story that one of her uncles used to sleep with this Bible under his head. For years, he did this because his mother told him to always keep the Bible close to him. So it was passed on to her. This uncle thought enough of her and her sense of family history to make her the keeper of this Bible. She is one of the few people who I met who has a tremendous sense of historical preservation of her family roots. Her whole family has a unique pride that I have seldom seen in most communities that I visited. They are a closely knit family. They have struggled together over the years. They work together, they love, and they take care of one another. When I was last visiting her, she had just come out of the hospital, and a lot of the family was just around. And I saw that as a wonderful opportunity to document and make a photograph for the family of 4 generations of women. Because of my migration patterns of black people, sometimes it's very difficult to find that many generations living that close together. They love the land, they live close to the land, and it was just really a wonderful experience to kind of know them, meet them, and photograph them.
All right, come on, look at me. Look at me. All right.
I don't think of these people like most anthropologists or folklorists would think of the people who they're working with. I don't think of these people as my subjects or informants. These are folks who are friends of mine. I come from a poor background, and so my early photo essays on black life reflect the background from which I come, because it was what I was most familiar with and what I was most concerned with. I've tried in my work to photograph poor people, but photograph them with dignity. You see, too many photographers go for the cheap, sensational way of doing things because the popular media has always wanted it. I believe that a person can be poor, but they are still somebody. All these people you see in my work are working. That's important. America would not be the strong country it is now had it not been for the fact that in its early years or its early stages of development, there was free black slave labor. So I maintain that these people are just as important in this culture as anyone else, and I will always focus on them. As a young person, my fascination with street life, my fascination with men and women who worked on horse and wagons was just tremendous. Now, what is this? What do I mean? There is a tradition in most eastern United States cities where people who were city dwellers were supplied fresh produce and many other things. It was carried on horse and wagons like today trucks bring everything. This tradition of supplying city dwellers with fresh fruits and produce goes back to when the history of the city begun. And when you travel through the marketplaces of the world, and especially Africa, you will find this still going on. As a young kid, cowboy and western movies were very popular. So it was quite a thing to come out of the theater and then see horse and wagons. I became a helper to these men. There's a folk tradition in my family where, back as far as my great-grandfather, people did this in my family. And it's just like a lot of young men will maybe sell newspapers as something to do when they're growing up. I did this. My fascination for this was one of the things that kept me on the street. I consider myself truly blessed as a result of having this experience, because what I learned through that process has deeply enriched me as a person and broadened me and enabled me to deal with people everywhere I go in the world. And so as a documentary photographer, this has proven to be an invaluable experience. When I worked in Mississippi, had I not once lived on a farm and understood farming, I probably would not have been able to relate as well to the people who were rural. When I went to Africa, one of the things that enabled me to work very well in the countryside was because my basic understanding of farming and rural people. Folk don't differ much. Anywhere that I went, the same type of people exist. They're either rural or they're urban. I think of my work not only as an essay or an exhibit or a book, but I think of it as an ongoing documentary project, an evolutionary project. I will be doing this photography until I die. And so where the photographs that I have devoted most of my time to till this point in my life have been of the poorer classes of people, I'm also photographing what is commonly known as the middle class, the upper middle class, and the rich. In many parts of the world, the images that people have of Black Americans are generally just the images of the downtrodden, the poor, the dope addicts, and pictures are seldom ever shown of the people who are prosperous and who are making it and who are sharing parts of the American dream. Our objective in America was to become educated and to move into mainstream America. Our objective was to get a good education and to get good jobs, and we are now doing that. Black people in America are probably making more headway as far as equipping themselves to deal with the times in which we are living than a lot of the brothers and sisters in other parts of the world. That's only because we have access to so much. I mean, we truly live very lavishly here compared to how people live in other parts of the world. A poor person in America may very well have a television, hot and cold running water, and may even have a car and be considered poor. Where in Africa, if someone's considered poor, or the Caribbean, they literally may not even have a house to live in. And so I'm concerned about these things, and I'm concerned about how the black middle class looks at the lower socioeconomic level of black life, how the rich use their riches when it comes to helping their less fortunate brothers. I see a lot of similarities in the problems that black people in America are confronted with and the problems that black people in Africa are confronted with. People migrating from the city to the urban centers for employment. This is a problem all over the world, finding work to sustain yourself. Most of the industries are always located near big urban centers. As people leave the land, one of the same things that is happening in America is happening in Africa. People are losing their land, and people are losing the traditions. I'm very interested in starting a project with brothers in Africa and the Caribbean to document whatever part of our traditional culture that still exists before it vanishes. That is just of the utmost importance to me. While working and living in Nigeria, because I'm interested in traditional culture and what happens to traditional culture, one of the things I wanted to do and did do was meet with photographers and different people working in the area of communications and mass media to try to get an understanding of how they looked at their own traditional culture and rapidly changing culture. Some of the photographers let me know in certain ways that they were very unhappy with the way the images of Africa in general and Nigeria in specifically were being projected in the popular media in the West. What they were really saying was something that touched me deeply, because it was some of the same kinds of feelings I had about the way black people are generally projected in the popular media, not only in America, but throughout the world. So my question then was to them, what are you doing about changing this? As a result of this, what is beginning to happen, or what has already been happening, but is beginning to get wider exposure, is more young people are focusing on documenting and writing about their own culture. As more and more African countries gain independence and also gain more control over the popular media, the magazines, newspapers, televisions, radios in their own countries, it will be interesting to see how they project their own images. There seems to be one segment of middle-class black folk who respond very positive to this to my work. And there's another group of black people who look at my photographs who are bothered by the photographs. I then have to ask myself, why are they bothered? One of the reasons people are bothered is in their endeavors to so-called overcome, there are many things that they want to forget. And this is because of the way that the dominant culture has forced different folk to look at themselves. For instance, there may be things that I would consider to be of significance as far as historical preservation is concerned. Other people may say, they are not significant, I want to forget them. The question then becomes, what is important? What is important is that people in any ethnic group, regardless of their background, look at what has gone before and learn from that, because the products of our heritage often serve to authenticate our presence through cultural change, cultural continuity, and cultural awareness. Thus, the photo document becomes extremely significant as a communicative process or tool to help you better understand yourself and your own roots and help you better to move from that point forward. Because if you can understand where you've been and learn from that experience, that will help you to develop the foundation upon which you can build a stronger tomorrow for yourself and your children and your family.